Hey guys, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm live. I just got home and I'm going to get started. Let me just set up so that I can see your questions, inshallah, and then we can begin. You guys can see me, right? Actually, I'll know in a second if you can see me. I think you can see me. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. Bismillah. There we are. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in Surah Al-Rahman, first He taught the Quran, then He created man, then He taught eloquence. Why does Allah say first He created man and then He taught him? Um, this is actually an interesting question. It's something I talk about when I explain Surah Al-Rahman. It seems that Allah deliberately changed the chronological order of what happened, meaning Allah Al-Rahman created the human being, eventually taught the Quran. A nice answer to this is kind of like what Justice Al-Mufti Taqi Uthmani said about this ayah. He said it's like Allah talked about the manual before He talked about the product. Like, yes, Allah created the human being, but the human being's creation would never have had purpose without the perfect manual. Almost as though the culmination of human beings being created was finally they'd be ready to take in the Quran. Because not only did Allah create the human being, He made him capable of speech. So one day, the human being would be capable of appreciating the best of all speech, meaning the Quran itself. Um, and so that would be the rhetorical benefit of mentioning He taught the Quran first and then creating the human being and teaching him speech second. In your opinion, why did Allah's wrath not engulf Bani Israel the way it did with all other nations who disobeyed their prophets? That's Allah's decision with them. Allah Azza wa Jal, and their denial of prophets is different from others because it's more hypocrisy than it is kufr. Um, they didn't outright disbelieve in them. They would say, وَقَدْ تَعْلَمُونَ أَنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ. You're causing me pain while you well know that I'm Allah's messenger to you. So it would actually be something that they would do as an act of hypocrisy. Allahu alam, perhaps Allah delayed their punishment or Allah kept them around to be an example for this ummah. But until I study, probably, there are some hadith. I'll be fair. There are some hadith about the subject, and some scholars have talked about their view on why the punishment for the Israelites were delayed, and perhaps it was delayed because the prophet that they tried to kill, or the messenger that they tried to kill, Isa alayhi salam, will come back, and then the punishment on them will be completed. But I have to do a little more research on that view before I arrive at that conclusion. I will probably be doing that when I study partly Surah Ali Imran, which is coming up in Ramadan, but probably more of that will happen when I study Bani Israel itself from Surah Al-Isra, Surah number 17, where Allah mentions the opening and the major chapters of their history in very brief in the beginning. So I'll probably scope out the answer to that question in some more depth when I get there. How can we encourage children to reflect on the Quran and love it without overwhelming them and getting too deep. Well, certainly you don't want to get too deep with kids. I mean, I've got 7 kids and I don't ever do that kind of stuff. Kids need stories, so tell them stories from the Quran and tell them in your own words and slip in some phrases of the ayat here and there. You tell kids a story and you don't make them feel like they're learning a book. They're just learning a captivating, powerful story. A recommendation I have, if your kids are maybe 8, 9 years old, they might enjoy some of the story nights that are already there on Bayyinah TV. I know a lot of kids attended it live and they really loved it. And a lot of kids who watched it on Bayyinah TV then eventually met me, had drawings of what I had taught and stuff, and they gave them to me. So it was pretty cute. So apparently it works. So, the more than what to teach your children, it's really how to teach that I would be worried about, like the art of teaching. Um, Interesting questions, but they're not about our course, but that's okay. It's an open question answer. If I can answer it, I will. What attitude should I have when embarking on tadabbur of the Quran, taking my own conclusions to the ayat based on what little I have read of the tafsir for my own private notes? That's a good question. I think that everyone should be taking notes on the Quran and writing down not just what they think the ayah means, but also, more importantly, what questions arise when they study that ayah. Then they should engage in the study of tafsir and see if their thought about that ayah was addressed. And if it wasn't addressed, then take it to people that know better than you and kind of engage in conversation with them, people that have been studying Quran a lot longer than you have. Let me just tell you a statement of fact. No one has authority over the Quran. There's no degree that says, now you are an authority on the Quran. Allah's word cannot be overcome by an authority. It's Allah's word. There will be more advanced students of this book than you are. The greatest scholars on the face of this earth will be, I don't even still call them scholars of the Quran, I call them very advanced students of the Quran. Okay, they're scholarly people. And they've done a lot more learning than you and I have. And I go to them to benefit from them. But understand that the final authority still belongs to the word of Allah itself. Right? I meet students that are doing their studies in Islamic studies in a madrasa. They've done 6 or 7 years of Islamic studies and they ask my advice. They know more than I do, but they ask my advice. And you know what advice I give them? I tell them, look, your loyalty is to learning. And your loyalty is to the word of Allah and the words of your Prophet ﷺ. And your loyalty to your teachers is one of you asking honest, genuine questions. If your teacher answers a question and you don't find it satisfactory, that doesn't mean you have to debate with your teacher or argue with your teacher, but you have the right to disagree with your teacher, to find the arguments presented to you not as compelling, and keep on looking, keep on seeking the answer. That is an obligation we have to the word of Allah. That our loyalty is not, well, the sheikh said this, therefore I'm going to be quiet because the sheikh knows best. No, why is it the answer? It's not disrespectful for you to ask, why did you come to the conclusion that you came to? What was the thought process or the evidences that led you to this conclusion? And maybe you don't find those evidences compelling enough. And maybe you have your reasons, and you can have that conversation, and that's not considered disrespectful. But yes, the road to tadabbur in the Quran is 2 things. Spiritual insights. You're reading something about the ingratitude of the Pharaoh, and you kind of have a thought about how ungrateful you and I have been in life or whatever. That's fine. That's not tafsir. That's just a reflection you got from what you read, and that's completely fine. But if you're interpreting the text and you're, extrapolating what does it mean, then not just for you, but what does it mean universally, then yeah, I would go to people that know more than you and I do and, try to seek their, perhaps not approval necessarily, but at least their opinion on what your thoughts are. Okay? Private notes, very important. How do we not refer to Hizb now? Wasn't Hizb heavenly too? The portion of the Quran daunting, what actually Prophet meant to say? I mean, I don't really know. I think that the term, just because the Rasul ﷺ used it, doesn't necessarily mean it's a heavenly term. You could argue that it is also, but it just didn't. I mean, some people still use, I've studied a hizb of the Quran, but it can also be used in a general sense. I've studied a large portion of the Quran, right? So it may not necessarily be a specific term. So because we're combining 2 things, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ in which he didn't explicitly divide it, and then something of the Sahaba, they used to divide it into 7 ahzab, but they may not be referring to the same thing. So, Allahu A'lam. I know explicitly surah and ayah are, of course, declared sacred by Quran itself. Any other questions? I'm looking. When was the order that we know now of the Quran decided? Really? Really? Did it happen when the Quran was complete or during while a surah was, oh, that's what you mean. Gotcha. Um, I don't know. We don't have that level of detail. We simply don't have it. We have about some surahs that were revealed in their entirety. We have some parts of surahs were revealed at particular incidents, and there are narrations that corroborate that. But there's no explicit evidence as to how it was being organized while it was coming down. I haven't read anything ever on it, so I can't answer. I simply could say, at least I don't know. We know about the final kind of rendition, but during, as it was a work in progress, or it was revelation in progress, rather. I think that's part of its wisdom because it was memorized, right, instead of put down in writing. Because if it was put down in writing and then more ayat would come that belong between. Okay. How long did the Prophet ﷺ live after the last revelation? We don't know either. Some say that the last revelation given to Rasulullah ﷺ was the part of the Surah Al-Baqarah, the ayat al-riba. Others disagree. There's no explicit evidence what the final ayat were. Or rather, there isn't any evidence that it's like absolutely conclusive. These were the last ayat given to the Prophet ﷺ. But if you were to accept that narration, that was at his deathbed. So it wasn't. It was moments before he died, or hours at the most. Can you please explain the phrase "Master of the heavens and the earth," which is really common in the Quran? Sometimes it feels like it's breaking the flow of the ayat, especially when you hear something a lot of times. It starts to lose, maybe even subconsciously, some meaning for the listener, which I obviously would not want to happen with the Book of Allah. I agree with you. I think that there's a tendency for us to think there's redundancy in the Quran, and the more I felt that when I first started studying the Quran. When I first went through it, cover to cover, brief tafsir, I was like, wait, he already said this. He said it again. He said it again. He said it again. He said it again. And naturally, when someone says something said over and over again, you're like, okay, I know that part. And you kind of skip it and you go to other parts that are more juicy for you, or you haven't done them before, So that tendency is dangerous, man. That's just dangerous. Like, I think the danger of underestimating the Quran or undervaluing the Quran, who's in most danger of that? Regular students of the Quran. Because they start assuming they already know. Or they start, oh, this part kind of easy. Oh, it's only talking about khalq. Or here we go, Allah is just describing some of his names. Okay, let's skip to the other part. But when I decided to study surahs in depth, like I decided Surah Al-Tahrim in depth, or Surah Al-Munafiqun in depth, or Baqarah in depth, I realized something about Allah's names and about these phrases. And it's not just about the phrase Master of the Heavens and the Earth, but other phrases. They're strategically used in places to make strategic arguments. It's the same phrase, but it means something else, then it means something else, or something more and something more and something more. In art, it's not, the color is the color, but where you placed it. Or a shape is a shape, but where you placed it changes everything, right? So it's the word, the phrase is the phrase, it's the same phrase, but where you use it is so strategic. Like, I'm currently teaching, I went on a Europe tour teaching parts of the story of Musa alayhi salam. And part of the debate between him and the Pharaoh, Musa alayhi salam said, Rabbi samawati wal ardi wa ma baynahuma in kuntum muqinin. Master of the skies and the earth and whatever's in between them, if you want to believe. But in that particular passage, Musa alayhi salam was challenging the worldview of the Pharaoh, who believed that he was the Lord of the earth, and his ancestor, his father, or his ancestors is actually the sun, because they believed in the sun god, Ra, who is the master of the skies. So by standing in the court of the Pharaoh, saying to the Pharaoh to his face, my master is the master of the skies and the earth and everything in between, he deconstructed the entire religious worldview of the Pharaoh, basically defying the king's religion. And back in the day, the religion of the king was the same as the constitution of the king, which means by defying that, you're actually committing an act of treason punishable by death. That phrase should get him killed. That's how powerful that phrase is in that context. I'm giving you this example only because my lawnmower is really loud. I know the guy's a bit excited. Um, I don't even know why we mow lawns in Texas. Nothing grows here. But I'll be right back. Hi, I'm back. Okay, it's gone. See? Problem solved. Richard's a good guy. Okay. I would give you a tour of the place, but it's a mess. Um, all right, so that answers that question, I think. بقرة آية number 31 وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين. He taught Adam the names, all of them. Then he showed them to the angels and said, inform me of the names of these if you are truthful. O Adam informed them of their names. The question is, angels can't lie, but humans can. So why did Allah say to the angels, if you are truthful? Can you help me understand? I could try. Their claim was, you are going to send on the earth someone who will spill blood. If your claim, your prediction is true, is accurate, truth not as in the opposite of lie, but truth as in the opposite of something that is said that's correct. You're not correct in your claim that human beings are going to only spill blood, because if you look at all these, Allah put all of humanity before the angels. That's why ha'ula'i is used. And this is actually furthered by a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where Adam ﷺ was shown all of his children and he knew all their names. And he said, that one, tell me about him. In particular, he picked out Dawud ﷺ, and they had something, and he saw something special in Dawud ﷺ. And it's kind of odd, right? Of all the prophets, he saw something in Dawud ﷺ, and they told him about him, and he said, give him 40 of my years. And it's really interesting. The only two people that are called Khalifa in the entire Quran are Adam and Dawud. Pretty awesome. Anyway, this is Allah telling them that among these human beings are people like Muhammad Rasulullah, Ibrahim, Musa, Adam, Dawud, etc., etc. And now that you wouldn't know their qualities, you just think it's a creature made of dirt and blood, and he's going to spill blood. He's going to spill blood. But then finally, when Allah described what humanity is capable of, they knew Allah knows better. So this is kind of Allah correcting them rather than not saying that they're lying. But angels can be wrong. They can't. It's not about lying, but they can be incorrect. So that's what that is. How would the Sahabas differentiate the wahi from the prophets? Normal speech. Oh my God, that's a cool question. Yes, thank you for that question. They would differentiate because the speech of the Prophet ﷺ is worlds apart from the speech of Rasulullah ﷺ. Worlds apart. The style, the vocabulary, the structure of sentences, the coherence of it is completely different. Like, you know how I talk. You guys have heard me enough times and gone to sleep enough times in your life for you to know how I talk. Now, give me a second. Let me demonstrate. I'll be back. Okay. Okay. If I were to listen to this. In explaining the accusative case of Wasabirina al-Farra adduces the example of Surah 4 ayah 162 لكن الراسخون في العلم إلى آخره. Al-Farra quotes different explanations of the oblique case of wal-muqimina, which is surrounded by nominals, all of which occur in the nominative. I don't talk like that. If you were on the phone and I was talking like that, you'd be like, what are you reading? You wouldn't say, what are you saying? You'd say, what are you reading? You can tell. My speech and what I'm reading, by the way, this is a pretty epic book. It's a lexicon of Al-Farra's terminology and his commentary on the Quran with definitions. Kinberg. Huge. And this is the stuff I read. Anyway, so speech and reading is different. Yatlu alaykum ayatina. Yatlu alayhim, ayatika. He will recite or read your ayat. Speech and reading are completely different. If your kid was reciting the Constitution of the United States or something to you, you'd know it's not your kid's words. The people knew when the Sahaba heard the Prophet ﷺ, they knew this is not his. That's Allah talking. Allah's speech has its own signature. You can just tell. Those of you that are seasoned students of the Quran, when you study Hadith, you can tell right away it's Hadith. Right away. Even if you haven't memorized Quran, that's not Quran. Your ear becomes tuned. And that's us like a millennium and a half later. Imagine those people whose language this was originally. There was no confusing it. None whatsoever. Anyhow, 138 in Surah Al-Baqarah. We take Sibghat Allah, okay? What about it? Can you please explain what is meant by mashriqs? Two mashriq. Oh, okay. I guess you guys are just randomly asking about different ayat, aren't you? Fine. This is a Quran QA, not a heavenly order QA anymore. Okay, no problem. Sibghat Allah, the word Sibgha has an a at the end, fatha at the end, that makes it mansub. Mansub means that there's a verb behind it that is implied. So in Arabic, you can say a word, but there's something behind it. Like when you say peace, it means I offer you peace, kind of like that. Okay. So we have adopted, or we've taken the color of Allah, suggests that we have drenched ourselves in our faith. And that now defines our personality, like someone who is drenched is completely covered or soaked in the paint that they fell inside. Like we've painted our personalities and our beings with our faith in Allah. And that's the expression that's been captured. Can you please explain what is meant by the two mashriqs and the two maghribs in the ayah in Surah Al-Rahman? Allah knows what it means. There have been lots of explanations of what it could mean. Some have said that because Allah is talking about jinns and human beings, that it could be that they have their sense of east and west and we have ours, and therefore Rabbul Mashriqaini wa Rabbul Maghribain. I personally incline more to the interpretation that, to give you a visual, that when a farmer wakes up in the morning, he sees the sun come out of this window, right? Over the course of the next 6 months, he'll see the sun come out of the second window. Like the rising of the sun shifts slightly. And then over the rest of the 6 months, it comes back to where it was. So in a sense, over the course of a farming season, you get two easts. And obviously, subsequently, you get two wests. Essentially, a phrase referring to all seasons, the master of all seasons. I find that very compelling of an argument, also because the context of these ayat, Allah is talking about vegetation and fruit growing and things. People were particularly keen on knowing those things, the ones that kept track of the seasons, and obviously their work relied heavily on their observations of the sun. So that would be Rabbul Mashriqaini wa Rabbul Maghribain. Okay. Should go up. You quoted ayah about the sacredness of Al-Kitab and no one can touch it except those who are pure. Does this also apply to the Mus'haf we refer to every day? I do not believe so. It's a fiqh question, but I'm personally not convinced that it refers to the Mus'haf. Is it mandatory to be in wudu before touching it or reading it? I don't know if it's mandatory, but I'd certainly like to be. So that's that. But no, the ayat are not referring to the Mus'haf in your hands. The ayat are referring to Lawh al-Mahfuz. It's very clear. There's no doubting that the ayat are referring to that. But out of reverence for that, should we make wudu? Perhaps. But do I want to make a fatwa out of that? No, probably not. I'm allergic to fatwa anyway. What does Allah exactly mean when He says in the Quran is our mention? Oh, okay. فيه ذكركم. Okay. Does it mean that Allah mentions us through reference? For example, those who believe muttaqeen, or is it deeper than this? If yes, can we say Allah will let us read the ayat we really need at that moment, which is ultimately a form of communication? How literally can we interpret the concept Allah is speaking to us via the Quran? Please elaborate, Ustad. Um, I do believe that to be the case, as you said it. I do believe Allah communicates with us every time directly when we are reciting His book. All we have to do is sincerely ask for guidance, and Allah will open our eyes and our hearts to something in the book that will solve a problem you're going through at that moment. Maybe it'll be one of Allah's names. Maybe it'll be a story that you needed lessons reminded from. The lessons in the book are timeless. The wisdom is timeless. You and I are going through problems that have solutions that are sitting inside of that book. In virtually every ayah, there's some solution. There's something in there for you. It's just a matter of إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَذِكْرَى لِمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ قَلْبٌ. In all of that, there is a powerful reminder for someone who truly has a heart. Meaning, it's a reading of the Quran with your heart, not with your dictionary, not with your brain, but with your heart. And then you find that Allah is giving you counsel. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us all worthy of His divine counsel. Um, when you say you can't go into an ayah itself, that you have to look at the context first before explaining the ayah, does it also apply in reading the Quran on a daily basis? No, it doesn't. When I open up the Quran, I feel disconnected because I just feel I can't read, understand, and really feel an ayah before knowing the context. Please explain how we as beginners can maintain a direct personal relationship with Allah through the Quran until we know enough of the context to comfortably open a Quran to just read one ayah, which is sufficient background. Is it better to listen to tafsir until we can do that? I think this is just what I think. We all have to listen to the Quran being explained and we have to recite it. And we have to do both of those things regularly. Now we don't have a choice. We are not Arabs, and even if we are, we don't know Quranic Arabic the way they did back in the day. We just have to make up for that. We have to make up for that by engaging the Quran spiritually, which means we're reciting it, and engaging the Quran intellectually, which means we're hearing its reminder. And so that's my view. Do we understand the Quran in light of Hadith or vice versa? I personally believe we understand all things in light of the Quran. Even Hadith is understood in light of the Quran. Allah, I'll give you some examples of that. It's a heavy thing to say. Of course, Hadith help us understanding the Quran, but I actually believe originally that it was the Quran that was elaborating or truly clarifying what is said in the prophetic teachings. I'll give you just a couple of examples. When Hudaybiyah happened, nobody understood what's going on. The Sahaba were angry, confused, depressed. They were heading back to Medina without having made the pilgrimage. They sacrificed the animal and the Quraysh are eating the meat. Like it was Abu Jandal has been sent back. Like it was a humiliating time. Ask any companion who were there at that moment what just happened, and they'll say defeat happened, humiliation happened, degradation happened, loss happened. And of course, they've never stood up against the Prophet ﷺ the way they did that day. And when they're going back, Allah reveals Surah Al-Fath. And when He reveals Surah Al-Fath, He says He gave the grandest victory. Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. Allah said something that nobody at the time understood. Like we say, for example, the context will help you understand the surah. What I'm saying is, in that people who were in that context, nobody understood it. Nobody understood the context until the Quran identified this was actually a victory. In this case, what happens? The event is being explained by the Quran. The Quran is explaining the event. Think of it this way. Sometimes you see in the news this happened or that happened, and you have experts commenting on it. So, I know what happened, but I want to understand why it happened, or what's the wisdom behind it, or what are the implications, etc. Think of an event happened, and now Allah is commenting on it. Allah's comments are not understood by the event. The event is understood by Allah's comments. And that's how, and that's not all hadith, but I'm talking about events in particular. We often say that we will understand the events better when we, or we, the ayat better when we study the events. But actually, I would say first and foremost, even though the reciprocal is also somewhat true, primarily, this is why the Quran is called light. Light is not something you shed light on. Light is something that shed lights on everything else. فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَالنُّورِ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ. And the purpose of light is to help you see. The Quran will help you see all things. So that would be the my take on that. Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. When the Quran speaks to the Quraysh, it uses mostly the word Quran. But when in Surah Al-Baqarah it speaks to Bani Israel, it mentions the book. When it came to them, they rejected it. Well, because the Quran was recited to the people of recitation, and yeah, Quran uses kitab for Quraysh too, but for Bani Israel particularly, because they had a kitab and they said we're not interested in something recited, we're interested in a book, and Allah gave them the terminology of book because Quran is kitab also. I have a question about Ayah 16 Anbiya. قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم. The Mushrikun quoted, "We have heard a young man mention them who is called Ibrahim." Why does the Quran use the name Ibrahim here? The Arabic name Ibrahim is an Arabized version of the Hebrew name Avraham, which means father of nations. Yes, it does. The Prophet Abraham was given that name much later in his life. How do you know that? As a young man, which he is in the passage, he was called Abram. Even when quoting people, Quran is miraculously concise with words and names, but in this passage, Allah uses a name to refer to the Prophet. At a time in his life, we didn't have that name. I'm not sure if he didn't have that name, and I don't know if there's conclusive evidence that he didn't have that name from the very beginning. So I can't understand the argument. But you'd have to prove explicitly that his name before that was Abram or Avram. I don't understand how there can be different interpretations about how many ayat make up a surah. I thought the Prophet ﷺ clearly mentioned when an ayah starts and when it ends. Whoa, you erased it, or you went up. Okay. Isn't that also part of the divine order of the Quran, like 143 ayah of Baqarah saying that we're in the middle of this? That doesn't happen often, but sometimes the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't instruct the Sahaba and say, this ayah ends here, this ayah ends here, this ayah ends here. It didn't happen like that. It was natural, right? And in some cases, there was some questions. So those rare occasions that it did happen. I don't know if that affects the order, because it's still the same order. It may affect how we interpret the ayah, because the pause is a cause for pause, even reflection-wise and study-wise. So that certainly raises an interesting question, but it's not a common thing for there to be a disagreement about how many ayat, or whether or not ayat should be looked at as one. I mean, I'll ask Sheikh Suhaib to maybe make up a list, see if he can give me at least a few examples of that. Ulum al-Quran is an interesting study where this comes up, and I'll have that discussion with him, and maybe in the next QA I'll bring this up. Who other scholars of current time believe upon the Nazm al-Quran? If less, why only few? I don't know who else. I don't keep track of who believes what, but it's a fascinating study, and I've met people in Islamic University of Malaysia when I went there. A few of them were doing their PhD on Nazm of the Quran. I've seen now new work come out of the Arab world that is focused more and more on Nazm of the Quran. I'm not impressed yet with some of the quality of the work, but it's happening. People are actually more and more are writing about it, and more are paying attention to it. Western academics are looking at it. There's actually somebody recently, our head of research, Sheikh Suhaib Saeed, told me that there's a group in the Gulf that was looking at it, and they had produced some work, and he said, man, they got to see our Bayyinah stuff because they haven't. So we're actually translating some of our stuff into Arabic so we can present it to them, because whatever they did see, they were kind of mind blown about it. So inshallah, we'll see how that goes. But I'm hoping to create panels of scholarly discussions, like scholars sit together and discuss Nazm. I just finished my preliminary Nazm analysis of Surah Ali Imran. I'm preparing for Ramadan. So I'm excited to share that with you guys in Ramadan, inshallah. Okay. Do other books from Allah also have an order? Also, Quran uses the word kitab for them, so they are engraved too. Yes, they are, and they must have an order. Sure, sure. It's the word of Allah. Another question. Throughout the Hebrew scriptures and even the Gospels of the New Testament, Allah is referred by a personal name made up of four Hebrew letters, Yahweh, often spelled out Yahweh or Jehovah in English. Um, in the English Jewish religion, in the Jewish religion, and even Christianity, this is not just any name of God, but His personal name. And many of the Israelites prophets have this name in their name: Jeremiah, Elijah, Isaiah, Zechariah. Okay. So my question is, why does Allah make a single reference to this name? A lot of Jews and Christians I spoke with asked me about this. They argue that if Quran is coming from the same God as the Hebrew scriptures, why would why would it use God's special personal name that He has seen throughout the early scriptures? Okay, this is a comparative religion sort of question, so I'm going to pass it off to my dear student and colleague Sharif Rondawa. And I'll actually, Maaz, if you can do me the favor of copying that and sending that over to him, and we can post the answer to that, inshallah ta'ala. So, because it requires a little bit extensive knowledge of Hebrew and the Hebrew scriptures, which I don't have. That's it. How do we know that hadith are authentic? This is not a hadith program. Dr. Akram Nadwi, I recommend, if you're having doubts about Bukhari, look him up online, Akram Nadwi. That'd be cool. But they're authentic. Okay, so I think primarily our questions are done with. Thank you so very much for attending. I also am late for catching some asr. I've been traveling. So, barakallahu fikum. I hope you guys are enjoying the course so far, and you're getting what you wanted out of it. I'm really happy that the course was conducted, and I'm looking forward to actually crafting the next course. Inshallah, you'll hear about it probably after, maybe during or after Ramadan. You hear about it, inshallah. Should I tell you what it is? No. Mm-mm.